My name is Deanna Garand. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Commissioner of Women's, Two-Spirit, Trans, and Non-Binary Circle for the Canadian Federation of Students here in Manitoba. I'll be moderating this town hall event, Know Your Rights to Housing in Manitoba. I would like to extend my appreciation to our panelists for joining us here this evening and sharing their knowledge with us all. I also want to recognize students who have taken time out to be present with us this evening. We know you're very busy with your studies and the start of the new winter term. And before we continue, I will pass it off to my colleague Francisca, who will be sharing our opening remarks as well as our land acknowledgements.
Hey everyone, my name is Francisca and I'm the Women's Co-Commissioner with the Canadian Federation of Students Manitoba for the next academic year. We're so excited to host this event because we understand the need to educate and empower students to recognize when they're being discriminated against, while also having the necessary resources needed to handle the situation. After this event, we will be sending out a comprehensive list of resources that have been prepared by our speakers to help students. If you have any questions, please email us at campaigns@cfs-mb.ca. I'd like to start this event with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that some of us are virtually tuning in from Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene people, and the traditional homeland of the Métis Nation. If panelists are calling in from a different territory, we ask you to acknowledge the line you are on before you begin. And if you are an attendee who is also outside of Treaty 1 territory, we encourage you to do the same within your own space. The Canadian Federation of Students is committed to reconciliation, and we recognize that land acknowledgements are only a small part of cultivating strong relationships with Indigenous students and communities. We offer this land acknowledgement as an opportunity to reflect and to dedicate ourselves as individuals and as an organization to working with Indigenous people and communities in a true spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I will now pass it on to Fortune to give us an overview on the housing discrimination campaign.
Hello, everyone. My name is Fortune Abel. Thank you very much, Francisca. I am the Black Student Co-Commissioner. This campaign started because we continue to hear from Black students who face discrimination and racism while trying to assess housing in Manitoba. We took it upon ourselves to work with folks in the community to amplify Black voices by collecting stories of people's lived experiences while assessing housing in this province. The feedback from those stories is the reason why we are hosting this event today. We hope that today's session will empower folks in the community with the right resources to handle discrimination, especially while assessing housing in Manitoba. I will now pass it on to Mary Paul to introduce our panelists.
Hello, everyone. This is Mary Paul. I'm your treasurer, CFS-MB. I just want to say thank you again for everyone to tune in and give us your precious time for this event. I would like to introduce our first speakers, Azarius Butario and River Woods, who are housing advisors at New Journey Housing, a housing resources center for newcomers to Canada. I would like to thank them again for joining us today and sharing their precious knowledge with us. And then I'll pass it over to folks for now so they can start the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you. Yes, Azarius and I are both tuning in here from Treaty 1. So thank you for that acknowledgement. So we're here today to tell you a little bit about New Journey Housing, which is the organization that we both work for. And this is meant to be, on our end anyway, fairly informal. So if folks have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and we'll also take some questions at the end. Basically, I just want to give you an overview of what we do at New Journey Housing, in case you or someone that you know might be able to or interested in accessing our services. So as Marie-Paul said, New Journey Housing is a resource center for newcomers in housing. And so that basically the reason that we were started is that we found that newcomers to Canada, whether they're coming as economic immigrants or refugees or international students, any kind of newcomer is going to face a challenge in understanding the culture around how does housing work? What are the rights and responsibilities of tenants and landlords? How does someone even buy a house? What do you do if you have problems with housing, with finding housing, or a problem with the landlord? And so we are a resource center for trying to help people answer all of those questions. And so we do that in a few ways. One way is through our workshop series. So we offer ongoing workshops in topics like rental, home purchasing, money management and budgeting. Which other ones, Azarias, am I missing?
I think these are the ones.
These are the main ones. And then we also offer one-offs every once in a while in some other things. And so, and our rental workshop, we think, is very, very applicable. It teaches how to search for housing, how to be a good tenant, and then also what are the rights and responsibilities of tenants, and what are certain things to look out for. And so we find that people who have taken our workshop are less likely to get taken advantage of by a landlord, because they know what their own rights are. And so we are geared, though, specifically for newcomers and people who are maybe unaware of how housing works in our culture. Another way that another service that we offer is our housing advisors. So Azarias and I are each housing advisors. There are 4 of us in our office, and we will happily meet with clients one-on-one to talk about their housing issues. We can help people search for housing. We and if there's a barrier, if there's a landlord issue, then we can help people navigate that. Sometimes a landlord issue ends up being something that needs to go to the residential tenancies branch. And that can be a really intimidating place to go. And so we are also able to accompany people through that process of accessing the residential tenancies branch. And we are not lawyers, but we are able to kind of accompany and support people as they go through that process. And we also do advocacy. And so, if someone is having if someone is being discriminated against in some way, they're welcome to come talk to us, and we might have some ideas, and we might be able to also help advocate, but it would be a one-on-one kind of situation, and we're there to help kind of brainstorm options, and at the end of the day, of course, each person is going to make their own decision about how they want to move forward, and our role is to offer information and support while they do that. So I think that's the main overview of what we do, and I'm going to turn it over to Azarias to talk about some of the barriers that some of our clients face when they arrive in Canada.
Thank you, Riva, for this opportunity. As you said, we help newcomers to Canada to find apartment for rent or houses for rent. And for us, newcomers means either you came today or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we don't limit. You talked about our rental workshop. At the end of the workshop, we give a rental training certificate. And this certificate helps a lot newcomers to Canada, potential renters, to be approved by landlords because it shows all the topics we cover during the rental workshop. Some newcomers to Canada, they face a lot of barriers and a lot of challenges in finding an apartment or a house for rent. For example, some landlords or some companies, they require a cosigner or a guarantor. So most of the newcomers to Canada, they are just coming and they have nobody here. So they faced a lot of challenges in this regards. Also, some newcomers to Canada, they face challenges when they apply because some landlords are asking for references, rental history. So all these are challenges and barriers our clients are facing. And some of them, unfortunately, they don't come or they are not aware of our rental workshop. So they don't attend our rental workshop and they end up messing up. For example, they give rent security deposit in so many places. And once they are approved in more than one, they are at risk of losing their security deposit. So, but as Riva said, when there is a problem between the tenant and the landlord, so we contact the landlord. We try to solve the problem. If we cannot solve the problem, so we go together with our client to residential tenancies branch. This is the Manitoba government branch. They have rules and regulations to help the tenants and to help the landlords. So we go together and we advocate for our clients. We try to see how our clients can get the services and helped. Yeah, and the services also we offer at New Gen Housing. We also have a home purchasing workshop. Riva talked about it, whereby we talk about mortgages. We talk about property tax, property insurance, mortgage life insurance. We talk about interest. We talked about the lawyers, the closing cost. We talked about the real estate agent. So we want our clients, before they buy houses, so that they can get a clear picture on how to buy houses. Also, talking about the budgeting workshop, money management workshop, we have budgeting session 1, whereby we talk about budgeting. We talk about tracking of your budget. And session 2, we talk about credit cards. And session 3, we talk about taxes and investment. So these are the services we offer. And in terms of renting, we have seen some newcomers are facing barriers and challenges, but we give them resources. They can go to human rights and complain. They can go to, as I said, residential tenancies branch and other services. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Azarias. I wanted to just, I remembered one other thing I wanted to mention, which is that we are also able to connect with international students before they arrive. We're calling that kind of our pre-arrivals program. And basically all it would take is for someone, if you know that someone is going to be coming as a student, but they're still back in their home country, they haven't arrived yet, they can just get in touch with us and actually with me directly. I'm the kind of directing that program. And I will reach out with them and have a one-on-one conversation about kind of what to expect in life in Winnipeg, and get them thinking a little bit about housing, answer some of their questions, and try to put them on the road to success. We know we've had issues with, for example, someone wanting to get set up well, and then they see an ad on Kijiji that seems great, and they send money for it, and then they arrive in Winnipeg and find that listing didn't even exist and they had gotten scammed. And so we try to help people prevent some of those things by having someone that they can, talk to and trust and ask their questions before they even arrive.
Yeah. And because we are private funded, we have the flexibility of receiving everybody, all newcomers to Canada, either permanent resident, international students, refugee claimants, temporary foreign workers, everybody. And all our services are free of charge. Free of charge.
And I will say thank you to Elizabeth for putting the rental resources page from our New Journey website in the chat. And our contact information is also there in our website, as well as a lot of good resources. So we encourage folks to take a look at our website, and you're welcome to contact us through the website at any time. And if you know of someone who has questions around housing, or is struggling in some way around housing, and they're a newcomer to Canada, then just reach out to us and we will do our best to work with them. I invite your questions.
I see Talani's hand is up. Talani, do you want to go ahead?
Yes, please, thank you. Hi, I'm Talani. Thank you for the presentation. It was really nice to hear of the service that that New Journey provides. I don't think I've ever heard of it before, and hearing about it, I can see the potential, like the limitless possibilities of how it could really be useful for international students. So that's really fun. A question that I do have though is are they like, does New Journey have like social media, like let's say Instagram or anything like that, that students could, I guess, contact them on, or just look at their pages? Because what I'm finding is like students tend to use social media more and use resources when it comes to social media than just like a website or anything like that. So yeah, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we do have an Instagram, and I am not on Instagram, so I don't even know what our Instagram is called, but I think that if you search for New Journey Housing on the Instagram, I think you will find it. I am like 39 years going on 89 years. And mostly what we put on our Instagram is, hey, thank you. Elizabeth is just on it, right? Mostly what we put on there is often updates about some of our upcoming specialty workshops that we're presenting. But if there are other things that you wish that you would see on there, we are open to suggestions. It will obviously not be me who's putting it there.
Perfect. Ali, I saw your hands up. I don't know if it was a question or something.
Yeah, River kind of already answered the question, but I just have another question perhaps. Does New Journey Housing work directly with like, I guess, student unions or like universities for international students who are coming in, or how do you folks work with international students who are moving to Canada, or folks who are living here right now? Thank you.
Sure, I'll take that one. Yes, our pre-arrivals program is fairly new, and so we don't have kind of formal connections with student unions very much about that. We've started talking to some folks about it, but would really like to do more of that because we know that international students have so many questions and are really keen to prepare, and we want people to prepare in the right way and not kind of waste their time doing something that's not going to be useful for them. And so if you folks have connections for us, we'd happily do that. And yeah, like the more people that we can reach out to, the better.
Yes, Judith.
Thanks, Mary Paul. Thank you, River and Azarias, for your great presentation. I noticed that you mentioned earlier newcomers having guarantors to be able to access apartments. I was wondering, like, is there a way that newcomers can still access apartment? Because having a guarantor is like one of the requirements. And have you folks ever successfully gotten one for a newcomer? Because I know when I came into Canada, I was left with the only option of getting like student housing, where you kind of have a house and rooming housing. I think that's what it's called. So I don't know, because I know a lot of people contact me and like, oh, can I get an apartment? And I tell them like, oh, you can't, because you haven't been here and you don't have a guarantor. So I was wondering if it's possible to still get one.
Azarias, do you want to take that one?
Yes. I wanted to let you know that a guarantor is not a must, but most of the landlords or companies, they require a guarantor. But you can still have an apartment, rent an apartment, and landlords will not require a guarantor. So it depends on landlords or companies. Some landlords, it's a must. You must bring a guarantor. If you don't have a guarantor, a cosigner, so it's too bad. You can't get an apartment. But others, they don't care. They say, just come in, even if you are new to Canada. And that is why we invite them to come to the rental workshop, whereby we give them a certificate. And this certificate, he or she will present it to the landlord. The landlord will look at it and say, wow, he or she has done the rental workshop, or he or she knows the rules, knows how to take care of an apartment, knows everything. So the landlord will feel comfortable to rent to this person because he or she knows the rules. And for example, he or she will know that if he damages, he will pay. So the landlord will feel comfortable to rent to such people. So as I said, to summarize, some of the landlords, they require a cosigner, but others, they don't. So it depends on landlords. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody has any question or. Okay.
If people think of questions later, please just email. I'll put my email in the chat and you can just email me later and we'd be happy to answer questions as you think of them later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Riva. That's really appreciated. Okay, so now we are going to present our second speaker, Karen Sharma. Karen uses the pronoun she and her and is a first-generation South Asian living in Winnipeg, Treaty 1 territory. Karen is currently the acting executive director of the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, where she has worked for the past 7 years. As the Commission's executive director, Karen leads the promotion and protection of human rights in Manitoba through administration of Manitoba's human rights complaints system, the development of policy and research, and the delivery of human rights education. Prior to joining the Commission, Karen worked with the province of Manitoba in a number of capacities, including as the Director of Strategic and Labor Market Initiatives with Manitoba Labor and Immigration. In addition, Karen is the chair of the Board of Directors of the Women's Health Clinic and a co-organizer with Queer People of Color Winnipeg, a collective that creates programming that centers and celebrates Two-Spirit, queer, and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today to talk a little bit about the connection between Manitoba's Human Rights Code and your rights in the realm of housing. And that was a great segue into talking about what I'm going to present on today, because our folks from New Journey Housing mentioned that there are a number of laws, rules, and regulations that set out responsibilities that landlords have and that tenants have, and rights that both landlords and tenants have when it comes to housing. And one of those pieces of laws that impact housing is the Human Rights Code, which our office is responsible for. So hopefully the information I give you today will give you a sense of, what are your rights when they come to housing, and also how do you stand up for those rights if you encounter things that feel like discrimination. And I'll talk more about what that is in a minute. So, racism, other forms of negative treatment that kind of impact your dignity and worth. So I have a little PowerPoint that I'm going to lead us through today. I hope that's okay. But I'm happy to take questions at the end. And if you have questions sort of as I'm kind of speaking, feel free to pop them into the chat. I'll try and kind of keep an eye on the chat, but also happy to kind of address those questions at the end as well. So here we go. So is that coming up okay? Looks good?
Looks great.
Great, perfect. So I want to talk to you about what the Human Rights Code is, what this law is all about, and why it's important to know about this law when you're looking for housing or have rented an apartment or house, or even when you're searching to purchase a home, because the law also impacts the purchasing of homes as well. So this is all about the Human Rights Code. And one of the fundamental principles that underlies the Human Rights Code, it's kind of like the core or foundation of what this law is all about, is the idea that every person is entitled to be treated on the basis of their individual worth, and every person should be kind of treated with dignity. It's connected to that idea that we're all born free and equal in dignity and rights. If you've gone to the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, you may have seen that in big lettering as soon as you enter into the galleries. And where this idea comes from, which is kind of at the foundation of the Human Rights Code, it's also echoed in the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And it's this idea that nobody should be treated negatively because of who they are, because of things about their identity. We're all entitled to equality. And so the way that the Human Rights Code protects that idea, that principle, is by ensuring that no one experiences what we call discrimination, negative treatment. And I'll define it more in a minute, on the basis of things about themselves. This Manitoba's Human Rights Code, there are similar laws like this all across Canada. So in each province and territory and at the federal level, there is a law that protects people from experiencing discrimination, that codifies that you have to be treated equally throughout our country. And it also echoes some of the rights that we have in our Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that says every person is equal before the law. So let's talk a little bit more about what this law is about. So I mentioned that the law is all about equality, the idea that every person is born free and equal, and no one should experience what we call unreasonable discrimination, unreasonable negative treatment on the basis of an aspect of their identity, something that goes to the core of who they are. And in our legal terms, we call these protected characteristics. So you shouldn't experience negative treatment, unreasonable discrimination on the basis of a protected characteristic. Now, the law, in order to make sure that people are following this principle, the law sets out a process where people can make complaints to our office, the Human Rights Commission, if they feel like that idea hasn't been upheld, like they've gone out to rent an apartment and maybe they think they've been turned away for reasons related to their gender or their race, etc. They can come and they can make a complaint of discrimination to our office. And our job is to figure out is there enough evidence there that we should send that complaint to our human rights tribunal in our province? So sort of like our special human rights court. And then if it goes to that court, they'll figure out how to remedy, make right that wrongdoing that occurred in that case. Before it ever gets to that stage of going to our specialized human rights court, we also try to resolve these issues through what we call mediation. So bringing the parties together and figuring out, can we come up with a solution, to what happened here, and make sure that everybody leaves understanding their obligations under the law, and with a good solution, sort of like what our folks at New Journey were saying when they'll help tenants, they'll help people that are looking for apartments, go to the landlord and figure out, okay, if something negative happened here, like how can we make this right? Or maybe take folks to the Residential Tenancies Commission. Our office has staff members that also assist with that kind of work too. But it's a little bit different because we're solely focused on human rights issues at our office. So I mentioned that the law is all about protecting people from experiencing negative treatment, discrimination, offense to a person's dignity and worth on the basis of aspects of their identity, things that go to the core of who we are, that make up things that make us original as people, or kind of make up our identity. And we call those in legal term protected characteristics, but they're things like our ancestry and race, our nationality or country of origin, and that can include citizenship status. So regardless of your citizenship or residency status, whether you're living, working, visiting in Manitoba, you're all protected under the Human Rights Code. So it doesn't matter if you're here on an international student permit, if you're here on a temporary work permit, on a visitor visa, you shouldn't experience discrimination when you're trying to access things like housing or public services or employment in Manitoba. So that includes citizenship status, things like your ethnicity, your religion, age, your sex and gender identity, your sexual orientation, your marital or family status. So sometimes we'll see situations of multi-generational or large families, and they might encounter issues in trying to access housing, your source of income. And we see this also in the area of housing too, people who maybe are in receipt of social assistance benefits, or perhaps they're accessing student loans or something like that, and they're experiencing negative treatment when they try to go rent housing. So that kind of thing is protected as well. Your political belief, and also disability and social disadvantage. So if you're experiencing poverty related circumstances, you shouldn't experience discrimination in Manitoba. So these are the core things that people are protected from experiencing negative treatment on the basis of it under our law. And when I say that idea of negative treatment or discrimination, well, what does that mean? Because, that could mean a whole host of things. And this is all sort of legalese, and we'll make sure you have a copy of this PowerPoint if you want to refer back to it. But in essence, the Human Rights Code defines discrimination or this negative treatment as when you're basically treated differently or unfavorably for reasons that are connected to one of those characteristics without there being a good justification for that treatment. So there might be cases where we do have to make distinctions, but there has to be a really good reason for that, like a good public safety, rationale, or a good, because it's extremely costly or something like that. This comes up sometimes in the area of vaccines lately. Maybe you're hearing people talk about vaccine status and that being an area of discrimination. And one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that whether it's the Human Rights Code or the Charter of Rights, they're all about protecting people from unreasonable discrimination or unreasonable negative treatment. So, which means that there are instances where there are reasonable limitations on those rights. So they're not absolute rights. So discrimination can be when you're treated negatively and there's not a good justification or reason for that treatment. And it can also mean when you don't have your needs, where those needs are related to an aspect of your identity reasonably accommodated. So what do we mean by that? We mean, if you are a student and maybe you have a mental health condition, that means that you need extra time to write exams, or maybe you need someone to assist you with note-taking. Those are all forms of reasonable accommodation. It's all about removing barriers so that we can all equally participate in society. Now, the other kinds of conduct that are not allowed under Manitoba's Human Rights Code are things like harassment. So that's where, you're experiencing name calling, abusive treatment on the basis, again, of one of those characteristics, and reprisal, which means in essence that someone can't retaliate against you because you filed a human rights complaint. So it's protecting people who participate in the human rights process from being negatively treated afterwards, or experiencing some form of retaliation. So where does the Human Rights Code apply? Basically, almost everywhere. So you're protected from discrimination in your employment. So that's if you're going for a job, if you've got a job, if you're losing a job, all of that, you have to make sure you do that in a non-discriminatory way. Public services, so that's any service that's readily available to the public. If you go to a government office, if you go to a restaurant, a hotel, a gym, any place where that's accessible to the public, we've got to make sure that that's happening in a non-discriminatory way as well. And then housing, which we mostly want to talk about today. When it comes to renting housing or purchasing housing, the Human Rights Code says that cannot happen in a discriminatory fashion. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. But just to finish off, contracts. So if you're entering into a contract with someone, or if you're posting signs in your place of business, or in your, in any of those kinds of public places, they also have to be non-discriminatory. Now, the one caveat really is that the Human Rights Code doesn't protect you from discrimination between sort of neighbors or friends, or at your family dinner table, which maybe sometimes we experience from time to time, some frustrating comments at our family dinner table, but the code doesn't extend to those private realms. It really is about protecting people from discrimination in all public areas of your life. So what are some examples of discrimination and harassment that we've heard about at the Commission in the area of housing? And maybe these ring true in terms of the kinds of scenarios that were gathered, or that you've been hearing about through your networks and communities. Well, we hear about situations where people are just refused the opportunity to rent a place because of some reason related to a protected characteristic, whether that's their race, their source of income, their ability, their age. They're finding it's difficult to even get their foot in the door of being able to rent a place, and finding, doors being closed to them over and over again. That might be an instance of discrimination. We hear about people being evicted from their housing. So they get in, and then suddenly they're getting notices or complaints from neighbors, from their landlord. And those are for reasons related to a protected characteristic. So some of the scenarios we've heard about are people receiving complaints about, and these might sound really ridiculous, but they're complaints that have come to us, smells and odors from their cooking, or the size of their family that's in their home, or maybe just other kinds of prejudicial attitudes that people hold about BIPOC communities, or any group that's protected under Manitoba's Human Rights Code. So those are instances we've heard about as well at the Commission. And we've also heard about scenarios where people are harassed by their landlord on the basis of a protected characteristic. And I want to give you a few real life examples from cases that have gone to human rights tribunals and have been decided, by the specialized human rights court that deal with discrimination in housing. So the first is a case from British Columbia. It's called Derosier versus Core, and it's a little bit old now, but it's from 2000, but it's still a scenario that we hear about in complaints that come to us. So in this case, Derosier and their friend James were looking to rent an apartment. They were actually each living individually in their own apartments, and they decided, you know what, we want to get a house. We think it will be more space for us. So we want to rent an actual, free dwelling kind of home. And we want to live together. And they each had kids and they wanted to live in a home together. And so they found one, it's hard to find housing in British Columbia, but they found a place. They thought this is ideal. And it was owned by a couple, one of whom was identified in the case as Core. So owned by a couple, and they used a rental agency to screen applicants, et cetera. So the rental agency got the application from Derosier and Core and James, and thought, these are great applicants. We're going to rent to them. We'll approve it on behalf of the owners, and we'll let them, prepare to move in 30 days' time. So when the day came for Derosier and their friend James to collect the keys to get access to the new house that they were going to be living in, the owners took one look at them, realized that they were Indigenous, and said, we don't rent to you. So the Derosier and James were, one day before they were meant to move into this place, they had let go of their existing apartments. They thought, how can this be? What do you mean? We've already been approved by your rental agency. What are you telling us, that you're not going to give us the keys? And Core said, yeah, we don't rent to people like you, and kind of lock the door, close them out. And they were left really in a real pinch. The rental agency found them some, interim accommodations, but it had a pretty significant negative impact on both Derosier and James, as you can imagine, right? Experiencing that kind of racial discrimination, being out of housing, like being without housing for a period of time. So it was a pretty significant case. The case was heard. Derosier and James, realized what happened to them was racial discrimination. They went to British Columbia's Human Rights Tribunal, and the case was heard by that tribunal or court, who found in their favor and found that this case constituted a form of racial discrimination in housing. Now, the next two cases are examples from Manitoba. The AB versus Jasnikowski case was about an applicant who attempted to rent an apartment in Winnipeg. When they went to rent the apartment, they identified that they were in receipt of social assistance benefits, and that they had, income saved up, that they were kind of ready to rent an apartment. They had in the past experienced periods of unstable housing, like sometimes they were couch surfing, like living with friends. Sometimes they would be homeless, but they had found this apartment that was within their budget, and they felt really, satisfied that they could do this at this point in their life and had the supports in place. They went to rent the apartment and were automatically disqualified from renting it because the landlord said that the amount of rent that they would have to pay was at too high of a ratio in relation to their income. So the landlord was basically saying, we'll only rent to people who are putting about 30% of their income to rent. Well, that's really difficult if you're on a limited income, and there will be almost no housing available to you in that kind of case. So the other thing that came out in that case was that the landlord refused to rent to any individuals who were in receipt of any kind of government assistance or benefits, which was really a pretty significant discriminatory decision. So what came out of this particular case that went to Manitoba's Human Rights Tribunal is that when landlords are making decisions about how to assess applicants, they have to do that in an individualized way. They can't decide, just as was said by our folks at New Journey, that every applicant, irregardless of their circumstances, has to provide a co-signer or guarantor, or every applicant has to ensure that 30% of their income, that's all that's going to rent. Because what might happen is you end up discriminating against people for a whole host of reasons, but they could include things like on the basis of their source of income, if they're newcomers to Canada, et cetera. So you've got to do an individualized assessment when you're figuring out whether this is a good tenant to rent to. And the last case is just an example of an individual who experienced harassment when they were renting. So in this case, the landlord was subjecting them to really degrading racist comments on the basis of their association with their partner who was Black, as well as on the basis of their sex. They were pregnant at the time. And the landlord regularly made demeaning comments to the tenants, really sort of driving them out of their housing. So that case also went to our Human Rights Tribunal, who found again that this kind of treatment is absolutely not allowed in Manitoba. And if it happens, landlords will be required to do things to remedy these kinds of scenarios. So those are examples of kinds of cases that we've seen. And all of those cases started with a human rights complaint to our office. So someone coming forward and saying, I think I've experienced discrimination. And then our office takes that complaint and we'll try, just like I said, to try to resolve the issues. But if that doesn't work, we'll investigate the complaint and figure out if it should go to a human rights hearing. In some cases, we might dismiss complaints because we don't think that there's enough evidence to move it forward to the hearing stage. But if we think there's enough evidence to move it forward, then our office has lawyers and they will argue that case before our Human Rights Tribunal, kind of like a prosecutor does in a criminal case. So they'll take that case and try to ensure that the wrongdoing that happened in that scenario is remedied. And the kinds of things that we look for when we're trying to remedy a case of discrimination is compensation to the people involved for the impact that this had on their dignity and for any financial losses that they may have had, as well as systemic change. So we want to make sure that the kind of things that happened don't happen again. And that happens through policies, programs, and procedural change, through training and education, and sometimes through monitoring programs. So if you want to know about your rights when it comes to housing, we've got a couple of resources you might want to be aware of: a fact sheet on discrimination in housing, as well as a more detailed guideline on how to think about human rights when you're dealing with housing, and then a whole host of other resources on our website as well, including information about filing a complaint. And you can always call I was just going to show you where those are on our website. So this is what our website looks like. And you can find these resources just under the Education and Resources tab. And the whole list of resources will come up there for you. The other thing you can do at any time if you have questions is call our office, and one of our intake officers will help you sort of navigate the issue. You can also email us. We have a Facebook page, but if you want to talk to us about a specific complaint, you do have to contact our office through our email or our phone, just for privacy reasons. So that's the best way to contact us. We're not as, I think, forward as New Journeys is in terms of social media again. So all we have is Facebook. I'm sorry for that. I feel like that's like a very antiquated form of technology, but in any event, you can always contact us and we'll try and help you out. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.